There's something different about people who wake up at 4 a.m. without an alarm. Maybe it's that quiet confidence they carry, like they've already lived half a day while everyone else is still dreaming. Maybe it's how they move through the world without that desperate, rushed energy most people wear like a second skin. Or maybe it's that peculiar relationship with time itself, like they've discovered hours that don't exist for the rest of us. Because waking at 4 a.m. isn't just a sleep pattern, it's a psychological architecture built from specific childhood experiences, family dynamics, and early life necessity that shaped how these people relate to productivity, solitude, and their own capabilities. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to understand why people who naturally rise before dawn aren't just disciplined. They're psychologically wired in ways that give them advantages most people don't even know exist. Let's start with something most people never consider about early risers. It usually begins long before they had any choice in the matter. Picture yourself at 5 years old. It's still dark outside, pitch black actually, and you hear your father's boots on the stairs. You're lying in bed, and those footsteps mean morning has arrived, whether you're ready or not. Your father doesn't knock. He doesn't turn on the light. He just opens your door and says quietly, "Time to get up." It's 4:30 in the morning. You pull on your clothes in the dark because turning on the light would wake your younger siblings. You follow him downstairs where he's already made coffee. You're too young for it, but you can smell it. That bitter adult smell that means the day has started. Outside, the farm is waiting. Or maybe it's not a farm. Maybe your parent works the early shift at the factory, leaves at 5 a.m., and someone needs to get the other kids ready for school. Or they're a baker, a nurse, a long-haul trucker who leaves before sunrise. Whatever the reason, 4 a.m. in your house isn't unusual. It's just Tuesday. Here's what's remarkable about this experience. While other children were learning that morning happens when an adult decides it happens, you were learning something different. You were internalizing what chronobiologists call social zeitgebers, external cues that set your biological clock. But yours weren't set by school schedules or cartoon programming. They were set by economic necessity and family obligation. What researchers now identify as Lark chronotype often isn't purely genetic. It's frequently established in childhood through repeated 4 a.m. wake-ups that literally rewire your circadian rhythm. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's master clock, was being trained to anticipate dawn before dawn arrived. This created adults who don't need motivation to wake early. They don't set multiple alarms or use sleep apps or gradually shift their schedule. Their bodies just know. When you've been waking at 4 a.m. since you were 6, it's not discipline. It's biology. They don't feel groggy because their cortisol surge happens earlier than most people's. They don't need coffee to function because their peak alertness window opens when others are still in REM sleep. And crucially, they don't experience early rising as sacrifice. It's not something they're doing to themselves, it's just when they're awake. But the hour itself was only part of what was being formed. Something else happened in those dark, quiet hours that shaped everything that came after. Now picture those first hours before anyone else wakes up. The house is silent, in a way it never is during the day. You're sitting at the kitchen table with your bowl of cereal, and the only sounds are the refrigerator humming and your own spoon clinking against the bowl. The street outside is empty. No cars, no voices. Just the occasional streetlight casting long shadows through the window. You're alone, but not lonely. There's a difference. You have this stretch of time that belongs only to you. Maybe you read before anyone else needs you to be social. Maybe you just sit and think. Maybe you watch the sky gradually shift from black to deep blue to that pale gray that means the sun is coming. Nobody is talking at you. Nobody needs anything from you. Nobody is performing emotions you need to navigate. You're just sitting there, being a person who exists before the performance of the day begins. And this happens every single morning for years. This daily practice of pre-dawn solitude created something psychologists are only now beginning to understand. What researchers call protective solitude, the capacity to be alone without experiencing it as deprivation. While other children were developing social cognition primarily through interaction, you were developing something else. Internal cognition through silence. Neuroscientists have found that regular periods of low stimulation solitude actually strengthen the brain's default mode network, the neural system responsible for self-reflection, creativity, and complex problem solving. You weren't just sitting there. Your brain was building pathways that would make you comfortable with your own company, capable of sustained focus, resistant to the anxiety that silence triggers in people who never learned this skill. These are adults who don't need background noise to think, who can sit in a quiet room and actually work instead of reaching for distractions, who don't panic during isolation or feel the compulsive need to fill every silence with content. When everyone else was doom scrolling during pandemic lockdowns, people with this background were quietly thriving. They'd been training for isolation since childhood. That 4 a.m. solitude wasn't just quiet time. It was psychological inoculation against the modern epidemic of needing constant stimulation just to feel okay. But here's where it gets interesting. That solitude wasn't empty. It was full of something most children never get enough of. Imagine being 7 years old, and by 7 a.m., before school even starts, you've already accomplished something real. Your father is outside feeding animals, or prepping equipment, or loading the truck. Your mother is making breakfast for 6 people, and packing lunches, and somehow also getting herself ready for work. And you're doing your part. Maybe you're getting your younger brother dressed. Maybe you're making your own lunch. Maybe you're folding laundry or setting the table or gathering eggs or any of the 1,000 small tasks that keep a working household running. The point is, you're contributing. You're not just being taken care of. You're part of the engine. By the time you get on the school bus, you've been useful. You've proven your value through action. School feels almost leisurely by comparison. You just have to sit and learn. You don't have to perform actual productive labor. That was hours ago, back when it was still dark. Here's what this early morning productivity pattern created in your developing brain. What psychologists call earned rest paradigm, the belief that relaxation must be purchased with prior productivity. While other children learned that morning was preparation time, you learned that morning was prime time, peak energy, peak clarity. The hours before the world made demands on you. Behavioral researchers have found that people who establish early morning productivity rituals develop what's called temporal locus of control. They feel they control time rather than time controlling them. You weren't just being disciplined. You were learning that your most valuable commodity, your alert, focused attention, happens before most people even wake up. This created adults who feel anxious if they haven't accomplished something by 9 a.m., who schedule their most important work before 7, who experience afternoon as maintenance time rather than prime time. They've internalized this hierarchy. Morning for creation, afternoon for response. They don't procrastinate on what matters because morning consciousness is precious, and they know exactly how to use it. While others are scrolling social media with their coffee, these people have already written, exercised, strategized, or built something. Not because they're trying harder, because their brain literally works better in those hours. But there's a shadow side to this pattern that nobody talks about. The part where rest becomes uncomfortable. Picture yourself in middle school. There's a sleepover at your friend's house, and everyone's staying up until 2 a.m. watching movies and eating junk food. You're trying. You're really trying to stay awake because this is what you're supposed to do. This is teenage bonding. but your eyes keep closing. Your body is shutting down because it's been awake for 20 hours, and your internal clock is screaming that you should have been asleep 4 hours ago. Everyone else is wired, laughing, full of energy. You feel like you're underwater. Eventually, you give up and fall asleep on the couch while everyone else is still going. The next morning, you wake up at 6 a.m., hours before anyone else, and you lie there in someone else's quiet house, feeling completely out of sync with your peers. They finally stumble awake at noon, groggy and laughing about how late they stayed up. You've been awake for 6 hours. You don't mention it. You've learned that this difference makes you weird. This social misalignment created something complex, what researchers call chronotype stigma, the social penalty for having a different biological rhythm than the cultural norm. Teen culture valorizes night owls. Staying up late signals freedom, rebellion, social commitment. Needing sleep by 10 p.m. reads as boring, old, not fully participating. But here's the fascinating part. Longitudinal studies by researchers like Christoph Randler have found that morning chronotypes actually show higher levels of proactivity and life satisfaction in adulthood, but lower social integration during adolescence. You were being socially penalized for a trait that would become an advantage later. You just didn't know it yet. This created adults who are comfortable being different, who stopped explaining their schedule to people who won't understand, who learned early that optimization sometimes means opting out. They don't feel FOMO about late night events because they've internalized that their energy currency works differently. They're not being antisocial when they decline the 8 p.m. dinner. They're being realistic. They know that by 8 p.m., they've already been awake 16 hours. That's like asking someone who woke at 10 a.m. to go out at 2 a.m. These people stopped performing a chronotype that isn't theirs. But social misalignment wasn't the only thing that made early rising feel like a separate reality. The world itself looked different. Consider what happened when you were driving to work at 5 a.m. in 1998. The radio isn't even broadcasting yet. The streets are empty in a way they never are during daylight. Traffic lights cycle through their patterns for nobody. Gas stations are closed. Coffee shops haven't opened yet. You made coffee at home because there was no choice. You pass a fox crossing the road, or a deer. Wildlife that vanishes when humans emerge. The sky is doing that thing where it's not quite dark, but not yet light. That in-between state that most people never witness. You get to your office building, and you're the only car in the parking lot. You unlock doors that most people never touch. You turn on lights in empty hallways. For an hour, maybe 2, this space belongs only to you. The phone doesn't ring. Email hasn't started arriving yet. The internet is quiet. This is before social media, before the 24-hour news cycle, before the world learned to be awake all the time. This experience of inhabiting the pre-dawn world created a specific type of psychological relationship with time and space. Environmental psychologists call this temporal ownership, the sense of possessing time and space that others don't access. Research by Mark Whitman on time perception shows that people who regularly experience low stimulation environments develop more accurate internal time estimation and less anxiety about time scarcity. You weren't just awake early. You were experiencing a parallel world that operated on different rules. Quiet streets, empty spaces, the absence of social performance. What urban sociologists identify as liminal time, the threshold hours between night and day when normal social structures don't apply. You became a citizen of that in-between world. These are adults who still seek out that liminal space, who feel most creative in the gap between 4 and 7 a.m., who understand that the world has layers and most people only experience the crowded, noisy surface layer. They know that restaurants at 5 p.m. are different than restaurants at 7 p.m. that cities at dawn are fundamentally different places than cities at midday. They've developed what you might call spatial literacy, the ability to read how time affects environment. And they guard those early morning hours fiercely because they remember what it feels like when the world hasn't woken up to make demands yet. But what happens when the world finally does wake up? That transition shaped something unexpected. Imagine it's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and you're in a meeting that could have been an email, and you can feel your brain shutting down. Your coworkers are energized, debating, throwing out ideas. You're trying to focus, but everything feels slightly muffled, like you're thinking through cotton. This is your 9th hour of being awake. For you, this is late evening. Your peak cognitive performance was 6 hours ago, back when you were alone in your home office, writing that report that only took you 45 minutes because your brain was firing on all cylinders. Now, you're supposed to be collaborative and creative and engaged, but your body is whispering that it's time to start winding down. You look around the conference table. Everyone else seems fine, alert, caffeinated. You wonder if you're just less capable, if something's wrong with you. The meeting ends at 3. You have 5 more hours of work ahead of you, and they're going to be the worst 5 hours because you're forcing your biology to perform when it's already given you its best work. This daily energy mismatch creates a particular type of anxiety that most people never connect to chronotype. What sleep researchers call social jet lag, the misalignment between your biological clock and your social or work schedule. Studies by Till Roenneberg show that operating against your chronotype creates chronic stress equivalent to actual jet lag. But here's the cruel part. Morning people experience this too, just differently. While society accommodates night owls with flexible start times and not a morning person mugs, it expects morning people to maintain peak performance all day. You're productive when nobody's watching, 4 to 7 a.m., and struggling when everyone is, 2 to 5 p.m. Your value becomes invisible while your limitations are public. This created adults with imposter syndrome around afternoon performance, who schedule around their energy curve rather than fighting it, who've learned to front-load critical thinking tasks and save administrative work for afternoon decline. They've stopped attending 4 p.m. meetings if they can avoid it. They've stopped feeling guilty about their 8 p.m. bedtime. And they've stopped comparing their 2 p.m. performance to other people's 2 p.m. performance because they've realized the comparison is meaningless. They gave their best work hours ago. What everyone else sees is just the remainder, the energy they have left after the real work is done. But here's what most people miss about early risers: the choice they make every single night that nobody sees. Picture this. Your friends are texting about meeting up for dinner at 8 p.m. It's Tuesday. That means you'd need to stay awake until at least 11 p.m. to make it worth going. You do the math automatically now. Get home at 11:30. Asleep by midnight if you're lucky. That's 4 hours less sleep than your body wants, which means you're either waking up exhausted at 4 a.m. anyway, or sleeping until 7 and losing your most valuable hours. Neither option works. So you decline. Again, you've declined so many evening invitations that people have stopped asking. You're always busy, they say, but you're not busy. You're asleep. By 8 p.m., you've been awake for 16 hours. Your brain has done a full day's work. You're ready for rest. But the world doesn't see it that way. The world sees someone who's unavailable, antisocial, boring, missing out on life. You've tried to explain it, how your morning solitude and productivity require evening sacrifice, but it sounds like an excuse, like you're choosing work over friendship. And in a way, you are. You're choosing the version of yourself that exists at 4 a.m. over the version that could exist at 8 p.m. This nightly trade-off reveals something crucial about how early risers think about time. what behavioral economists would call intertemporal choice with asymmetric values, trading future pleasure for present capability. But it's more complex than simple delayed gratification. You're not trading now for later. You're trading evening hours, which feel depleted, for morning hours, which feel potent. Research on chronotype and time preference by Randler and Weber shows morning types consistently value time quality over time quantity. An hour at 5 a.m. isn't equivalent to an hour at 9 p.m. The morning hour is worth more because your cognitive capacity is higher. You're not sacrificing social time. You're investing in your best self. This created adults who've made peace with social consequences of biological reality, who have smaller social circles but deeper individual relationships with people who respect their schedule, who've learned that trying to be available at everyone else's convenience means being unavailable to themselves. They're not martyrs. They're pragmatists. They know that forcing evening participation costs them 3 days of recovery. That one late night obliterates a week of mornings, and they've decided their morning self, clear, focused, capable, matters more than their evening self, the one that would be there physically, but checked out mentally, performing presence while feeling depleted. Which brings us to the final piece. This all adds up to something profound. Imagine waking up in complete darkness and knowing, without looking, that it's exactly 4:07 a.m. You don't reach for your phone. You don't need to. Your body just knows. The same way you know when you're hungry or need to use the bathroom, you know what time it is. You've been waking at this hour for so long that your brain has stopped needing external cues. Your cortisol surge happens here. Your body temperature starts rising here. Your brain begins producing serotonin here. This isn't discipline overriding biology. This is biology perfectly aligned with behavior. You get out of bed without grogginess because your body anticipated this moment and prepared for it. No jarring alarm sound. No snooze button negotiation. No groggy confusion about where you are or what day it is. You transition from sleep to wakefulness as smoothly as the sky transitions from night to dawn. And you've been doing this so long that you can't remember what it felt like to need an alarm. This natural awakening without artificial intervention represents something most people never develop. What chronobiologists call circadian entrainment, your behavior perfectly synchronized with your biological rhythm. Research by Michael Rosbash, who won the Nobel Prize for Circadian Rhythm Research, shows that consistent sleep-wake patterns strengthen the molecular clock in every cell of your body. You're not fighting your biology with discipline. You've trained your biology through consistency. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock, has become so reliable that your body prepares for waking before you're conscious. This is the opposite of what most people experience, forcing themselves awake against their body's protests. You've achieved what sleep researchers call chronotype optimization. These are people who've discovered something others spend their lives missing: alignment between who they are and how they live. They're not performing productivity. They're not using willpower to overcome biological resistance. They've structured their entire life around their natural rhythm instead of fighting it. And that alignment, biological, psychological, behavioral, creates something that looks like superhuman discipline, but is actually just harmony. They wake at 4 a.m. the way other people wake at 7. Naturally, easily, because their entire system is designed for it. They're not better. They're just profoundly, completely themselves. They learn to be awake while the world sleeps, to be productive when others are dreaming, to find value in hours that don't exist for most people. They discovered that the gap between night and day belongs to those willing to inhabit it. That morning isn't preparation time, it's prime time. That the quiet hours before the world makes demands are the most valuable currency they have. They learn to hold a paradox most people never navigate. Being completely in sync with their own biology, while being perpetually out of sync with social expectations. They chose alignment with themselves over alignment with the world. And that choice, made every single night when they go to bed at 8 p.m. while everyone else is just getting started, is what separates discipline from identity. That's the psychology of people who wake up at 4 a.m. without an alarm. Not because they force themselves, because they've become themselves. And that's a kind of optimization most people never achieve. Not of productivity, but of alignment between who they are and how they live.